Hi, this is part 2 of historical, archival, and policy research, where I'll just be sharing a little bit of my experience in working with archival and policy data. So in the last video I told you about my personal experience in getting archival data from the Archives of Ontario. So that data I was using to create a case study. Case study was my methodology. So I tried to summarize all the information that was in the archival data that I got and triangulate it against the other sets of data, which were largely interview data from participants in the process, and try to make sense of the closest approximation to policy timelines, activities, and so forth. So that was a fairly straightforward treatment of the data. It was not, a critical analysis or anything like that. Now, for the other project I mentioned, which was the Journal of Education Policy article, I did a certain type of a narrative analysis of data, and I invite you to take a look at that article and see the approach that I took. Journal of Education Policy is one of the more prestigious journals, and they really want pretty rigorous analysis. So they want to see triangulation, that is, analyzing the data but looking at it from different angles to see if there's strength in the data. The majority of the work I did was interpretive analysis. I read and reread and reread and reread all of these texts to look for themes that emerged, but it wasn't just any themes. I was working within this kind of literary narrative context, which is something that comes out of the literature, and again, you can have a look at the article to see how it emerged, because I think it's a bit too much detail for the video. But essentially I was looking for literary devices that were occurring. So how was the story being constructed and told? What literary devices were being used to convey this story? And I arrived at that approach because in my initial sort of investigation into this phenomenon of financial literacy education, and I'd already published a few papers on it, looking at it from different ways, I realized there was a very emotional component to it and a narrative account that appeared throughout numerous texts that I'd read before. And so when I started to work with this data, I kind of just wanted to see what happened if I looked at it from a literary perspective, and I was really pleased with what emerged. It probably took me about 3 weeks working with this huge stack of texts. I was actually working with hard copies. It was summertime, so I did a lot of my work outdoors, but reading, thinking, and shortlisting sort of devices I was seeing, like metaphors, schemes, tropes, that kind of thing, and looking for overall literary themes that were coming out. And I was very pleased that really kind of two main stories emerged, which was the story of the Crusaders, and that term was used, and then the story of the foxes in the chicken coop, which again was quite directly appearing in the textual files. And so that was the overall. Now, beyond that, I was doing proper discourse analysis. So I was using coding mechanisms, and I was using a framework to help guide what I found. So that was the initial piece that I arrived at. But I was also looking at how they were using language. So I was coding words that were coming up frequently in phrases. And that, to do it interpretively, there's nothing wrong with that. But I also wanted to do a little bit more. So I actually used freeware called ArtConc, which helps with collocation analysis, and that is a method of looking for recurring, I guess, linguistic devices, words, phrases, etc. And that just kind of helped me to confirm that I was on the right track with my own interpretive analysis. It's a really easy software to use. You just download it, play around with it, and you'll see what you find. But on its own, it's, it doesn't give you definitive answers. It's something that you have to use along with your own analytical ability. So that was my experience with that. Now, these are just two experiences that I'm sharing with you, and I think that if you look at this week's readings as a whole, you'll see that there's a number of ways that you can approach your archival, historical, and policy data collection and analysis. It's a matter of really getting a good handle on the literature that relates to your topic. And just going back to the financial literacy policy paper, I mean, I have this file that I keep of methodological approaches, and I spent a very long time, like probably a week, 8 hours a day, just making sure that I was clear on my analytical approach, making sure that I was as much of an expert as possible on this approach to data analysis. So reading everything I could, reading an article, then going through and reading all the references in that article, and so on and so forth, and relying heavily on my university library to provide me with access to these articles. And as well, in this particular case, it wasn't as relevant because I was working more from the political science literature, but books like Cresswell's is extremely important as a reference piece for something like this. You don't need to have the book necessarily, but if you can get access to it from your library to check up, I would definitely recommend that you do that. So I hope that this little personal narrative gives you a little bit more insight into another facet of the research process. And again, I'm giving you practical examples, so I do encourage you to keep up with this week's course readings. And if anything I've said really interests you, email me and work with as many of readings that you find as you possibly can to become an expert in the processes that intrigue you.